Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Walking with Ancestors, which is part of the I'm here today with a special guest I'm really excited about, Mark Puryear. Welcome, Mark.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Sean.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's a great pleasure. I've been kind of paying attention to what you've been doing over the last few years, and some of it's really exciting, and especially to me particularly. And it's the momentum that you're building is exciting for the whole heathen community, I think. And I just wanted to get you on here and talk a little bit about that kind of stuff today. So tell me what you're up to, man. Tell me about the Nordic Society.
Well, the thing is the Nordic Society, we've been working for a number of years now. I think we started in 2009, really kicked it off. And, when we first started, we knew that, the Nordic Society was originally founded in the 1800s by Ross Anderson, and we wanted to pay homage to that because Ross Anderson did so much, to present these sources and start presenting them correctly. He was the one who fought to get Leif Erikson Day recognized as a holiday.
Wow.
He translated Victor Rydberg's books and stuff like that, and that's always been a big influence on what we're doing. And so we wanted to pay homage to that. We wanted to, pay homage to the history of that. And so we started the Nordic Society. We contacted the estate of Mr. Anderson, and they said they were fine with it, and we started working from there. We started putting out books. We put out the Nature of Asatru, then the Asatru Edda, the Odinist Edda, the Odinist Edda Study Guide.
Slow down a little bit. Some folks are probably going to be trying to write this stuff down. I mean, we'll provide some links up here somewhere later, but, I just wanted, I know you're excited. I'm excited too, but there's some folks that are really paying attention to what we're saying.
Yeah. And so we put out a whole bunch of books. All of our books are on Amazon. You can find all of them on there. It's pretty easy to access. We have our website, www.norna.org, and we're always putting out materials. We're always putting out new content. We're really trying to just get what we have discovered out there and show people how it can benefit us as a religion, as polytheists, so that we can move forward. I've been around the heathen movement for a long time. I was actually friends with Elsa Christensen when she was still alive. And, she got me in contact with a lot of people. I started getting all the magazines like Bortrue and Runestone and the Odinist and all these different magazines people were putting out before the internet. And one of the things that we noticed in the letters to editors section was people always talking about how so much was missing, how so much was taken from us, Everybody got kind of stuck in this rut of like trying to create like the heathen book. So they would write like a single book and they would put some rituals in it, mentionings of the gods, some discussion on the runes.
Right.
And that same book kept being put together over and over and over again. And I'm guilty of it. I actually started to write a book like that myself. And it was actually when I was watching a festival on Hindu festival, the documentary on one, right? And when I was watching it, I could literally see like their entire culture was being put on display. You had people like dancing, people like cooking food. You had people performing rituals. all of this stuff happened, and I had like this big eureka moment, that what we would do is, instead of trying to write one book and concentrating everything, because the culture is just too big to do that.
I agree.
Right? We would
Totally.
focus we'd focus like a laser beam on one subject at a time. And when we started doing that, just focusing on one thing, one tiny detail of one subject at a time, we started learning all of these things and started developing all of these different theories that a lot of the academics just kind of glossed over and didn't worry about, didn't care about. And we were like, no, this is important stuff. It has to be done,
Yeah, and
so
it wasn't part of the academic culture to get that in depth because they didn't have any real motivation to,
Right.
They just
exactly.
Their job is not to do that necessarily, and that's really where we come in. What our job is to do exactly what you're talking about. So please carry on.
Yeah, so we created what we call the 12 Fundamentals Project, and the 12 Fundamentals Project is focusing on each one of those subjects. Each fundamental is a subject of learning and study and research. So you have like law and lore, pantheon, nature, combat, spirituality, folk and ancestry, arts and crafts, all the different subjects that you can focus on. And then when you do that, you start to learn things and discover things because you're not all over the place.
Right.
Looking at all of this, because it's a culture, it's an entire culture. You're talking about like centuries and centuries of development, and not just, trying to say, oh, I can write a 200-page book and it covers everything.
No fucking way, man. For those of us that have been exploring this from the esoteric perspectives, I can tell you the same thing from where we're coming from. There's no fucking way that you could put all of what we're doing from a consciousness perspective, just that one small sliver of all this. There's no way you could put that all into one book. It's a lifetime worth of study, man.
It is. It's almost each subject is a lifetime worth of study,
Yeah.
And so so that's why we're trying to get more and more people involved, because the more people we have involved, the more projects we have going, and the more projects we have going, the more likelihood we'll have at least a groundwork laid in our lifetimes.
Yep. In the military, we call that a force multiplier. When you take what you're doing and you transform it into a whole bunch of things that are focused on the same direction and capabilities. And trying to do the same thing with regard to my stuff too. So yeah, I can relate to the value of that 100%.
Right. So one of the things that, like, one of the topics, just for an example, we looked at was the music fundamental, right?
Yeah, that one's close to my heart, actually.
So when we started doing that, the first thing I did, because I've read, one of the books that really inspired me and pushed me towards this was Jacob Grimm's, Deutsch mythology. It's very, very important work for what we're doing.
Definitely.
And so is Rydberg's, and so is Dumazil's, and so is, a lot of these academics. We kind of like the ones from the 1800s because they have like the best methods that we think, because they were just sort of putting their foot in the water and trying to just figure out what it was rather than putting an interpretation on it or spin on it.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
So like Grimm was one of the greatest philologists who ever lived, and he's known for the collection of his fairy tales with his brother and all that. But this Deutsch mythology goes into a lot of different stuff and really helps us to flesh out a lot of these different things. So when we're looking at what they did and what Grimm did and what Rydberg did, it helps us to develop these theories. And so one of the things that we did when we were looking at Grimm is he mentions this guy named Arvidsson, Adolf Ivar Arvidsson, right? And Arvidsson, he keeps mentioning, Grimm kept mentioning in his Deutsch mythology, these folk songs that mention like Odin and Frigga, and I was like, where the hell is that?
Right,
where do we find this?
We have a lost home. We have to go find it.
Right, and so
Definitely.
I spent years, like literally years, because it's a very obscure text.
Yeah.
And it was, I even asked like Swedish people, because it's in, Arvidsson was Swedish. And,
right.
The book was called Svenska Fornsanger, which meant, the ancient songs of Sweden. And like a lot of Swedes had never even heard of it, and they don't know. They were like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I eventually locked it down, and I think it was a Swedish university, and they connected me to a library, and they connected me to another library, and we eventually got these books and got a hold of them, right? And it's like a whole collection of folk songs. Now a lot of them
dude, that must have been a hell of an exciting moment when you got the book in your hand and you're like,
well, the most exciting part was finding the songs, because there's still a lot of Christian songs in it,
Sure,
yeah. Just collecting every folk song there was,
Right.
But then like when we started making discoveries of songs that are like actual heathen songs. They have heathen themes in them. Like we found a folk song version of Grimsbida called "The Hammer Stolen," and we found another one, the best one, the one that's had me the most excited, is a song called "The Yule Buck."
Yeah.
And the Yule Buck is basically a song that describes an actual heathen sacrifice. And we broke down the symbolism of it, and we looked at it, and it like developed like a philosophy around it. We believe that sacrifices are actually performed in order to give an animal an afterlife.
Yes.
That perhaps they believe that it didn't, if they didn't have a sacrifice. And so it was like the whole song is just amazing. And then we found like love songs with Freya that we know the Christians like made illegal. And,
right. I've heard about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we found like all of this stuff, man, and it's like that's just from doing that. So then like take like the diet fundamental that we looked at. We're trying to create like sacred recipes and sacred ideas. Like what did they have as a sacred sacrificial meal?
Right.
And
right. Incredibly important to us.
Right. And we found out, looking at archaeology, looking at the lore, looking at the histories and the sagas, that it was a sacred kettle and it was a sacred stew that was involved in sacrifice. And this is why witches' cauldrons later became demonized as like an evil thing.
Wow.
Because it was just them attacking the sacrificial kettles, what Grimm calls the Os kettle, or there was another one called Thor kettle. He basically took the names Os kettle and Thor kettle and said, these were people that were named after these sacred like sacrificial pots. And
listen, a lot of folks that are watching this right now are just learning about everything that we do, and a lot of them are witches, and their probably jaws just dropped when you said that, dude. Just throw that in there, man. I didn't mean to interrupt the flow.
No, it's all good. So the thing is that you have these kettles, and we have tons of them from archaeology. If you look on our Facebook page, the Nordic Society Facebook page, I have a whole like thread, like a bunch of different posts I made on this, showing the archaeological finds, showing the lore, showing the history. I mean, and we believe, right, that all of the sacrifice goes back to Ginnungagap. It goes back to the story of the creation.
That makes
sense. You have the pot itself, the sacrificial cauldron, the Os kettle, is basically Ginnungagap itself,
Okay.
And then you pour the stew into it, which is basically the ice. It's the essence of life.
Right.
And then underneath it, the heat that heats it up and makes it sustenance. It becomes the creation story, right?
Right.
And then,
yeah. The rime goes in, the fire's underneath, the two come together, and then you have Midgard.
Right.
Or
you have the Underworld, and then that the gods later create Midgard. But that goes into another thing that I was talking to you about before. It's the concept of Aur, A-U-R-R.
Yeah, let's talk about that, dude. I want to hear about this.
Yeah, so the Aur is mentioned in the Prozetta, right? And it's mentioned in Bulaspa.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to go into. I want to go into our litmus test after this, just to break down some of these things. Right?
We'll take a commercial break before we go into the litmus test. But yeah, we got a lot of things I want to cover here too, man. Go ahead.
So the Aur it's A-U-R-R. It's basically a sacred substance.
Okay.
That is translated as mud, but we believe that it's more than that. We believe that it's almost like the mud of the underworld or something, that it's connected to because the underworld is considered like the greatest world. It's called Jormungandr, the great ground, right? And and it's connected. The roots of Yggdrasil are there.
Yeah.
It's the basis of life. That's where Ginnungagap is. That turns into Mimir's Well. And so this substance is very important. Because when you're starting to look at the prefix Aur, A-U-R, which is, you add the extra R when it's by itself, this prefix gets put into a lot of different names. And all of these names are connected to the same story, right? So you start with the word Aurochs, right?
Yes.
That's the Aurochs. The word is the same as the, R, as we see like in the R.
As some of you know, it's represented by the Uruz rune.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's, there's actually like some later words where they call it like Urkon, which is same as Uruz, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And so the Aurochs basically means like mud ox, or sometimes some people call it like the moor dweller, the ox of the moor of the muddy lands, right?
Right.
Well, then Ymir himself, the giant that feeds from the teats of the Aurochs of Althumla, he becomes Argelmer. A-U-R, Gelmer, right? Gelmer means like the roar, the mud
Right.
roar.
Argilmir, yeah.
Sounds, right?
Yep.
Right. And so then you have the Arbangaland, which is the land, basically the fields, the land of the fields of Ar, right? And then you have this Ar that is the mud that the Norns put on the roots of Yggdrasil, which is mentioned in the Prosetta, right?
Yes.
And then that mud is put upon Yggdrasil, and then Yggdrasil becomes Hourglasser, which means the mud resplendent, right?
Yes.
And so what we believe here is that, and we're looking at like Vedic connections and stuff like that, is that this is basically Audhumla's milk within the flesh of the soil, because the gods kill Ymir and they make the soil from his flesh, right?
Yes.
And that flesh is saturated with the milk of Audhumla, and it becomes part of this this layout, okay? And so what we're looking at is that, you know, this may be the basis for using milk within a sacrificial setting, and then that milk would represent the bowl of, you know, the southern realm. And so you'd have three bowls on your altar, or stali, and that southern bowl would be the, you know, filled with milk that would represent the hour, right? Then in the center bowl you'd have mead, because Mimir's well is the mead bowl, you know, the mead well. It's the mead that Odin drinks from. He gains inspiration, all that stuff. It's the Sumbul mead, right? And then you have in the north, you'd have the water bowl, because Vergelmer, the northern well, is called the Well of Waters. It's the mother of all waters. And it's connected to Eikthurner, the stag who's, you know, the antlers, he makes the rains from, stuff like that.
Right.
And so we see these three functions of these three bowls, starting with the bowl of the hour, the Erdebrun's bowl.
Yes.
Interesting thing about that is the mead from Erd's well is called both Erthermagen and Yarthermagen, right? Depending on which text you're looking at. Like, it's a variant of the same story.
Right.
And so Erthermagen means Erd's strength, and then Yarthermagen means the earth's strength, right? The strength of the earth.
Right.
So it shows like the R and the well, you know, because it's mixed with the mead of Erd, it becomes like this substance, this holy sacred substance that we believe turns Yggdrasil invisible, you know, because in the Prosetta it says it turns it into like the membrane of an eggshell. It turns it transparent, it turns it invisible. It's like a riddle. Right?
Yeah, right.
And so that's how it becomes Hourglasser. It becomes resplendent, and that's why we don't see it, you know. And so when we're looking at this, we're actually developing an entire ritual system based on the idea that we're connecting things to our cosmology. And our cosmology
we really need this.
It's so important because, you know, when I started studying like the Indo-European connections and the Vedic connections and all that, one of the most important things that you'll see there was that when you're looking at it, they consider their altar to be cosmological as well, right? It's like the realm of the gods.
Yes.
So when you're looking at that, and then you look at other religions, almost every religion, when you're looking at the building of temples, you're looking at the building of sacred sites, it's all connected to a cosmology, right?
Exactly, yes. And you can see it, it's representative in every single temple that you see anywhere in the world.
Right. And so when we're looking at that, you know, for the longest time, I thought, because I was looking strictly at the Vedic connections, I thought that like the altar and the stali and the area was connected to Asgard. But I actually don't believe that's the case now. I think that it's the underworld. I think that that's what it is, because all of the implements that are on the altar are connected to the underworld. You know, like the Gander, which represents the Norns, who are in the underworld. Thor's hammer is in Alfheim, which is in the underworld.
Right.
You have the three bowls, which are the underworld wells. You have the drinking horn, which is Audhumla's horn, who's in the underworld. You know, and so these symbols just kept playing out. And the biggest one that we found, right, was when we're actually in the middle of translating the Voluspa. We're creating a Nordic Society translation of the Voluspa. And I'm telling you right now, we are finding so many errors in the academic translation. I mean, it's just insane. Like, it's things that are so important, and they'll change your entire perspective of these poems, right?
This is really important shit, because there's a whole lot of us that are looking at this from not me, but there's a whole lot of us that are looking at this coming into it from some sort of a fundamentalist kind of perspective, and we're reading this shit that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Go ahead.
So the thing is that one of the mistranslations that we found, and you can look through most of the translation. I wouldn't say all of them. I think there's one or two of them that got it right.
Yeah.
But in the second verse of Bulaspa, there's this word called Ibijur, right? And
What's that word again? Say that word again.
Ibijur, right? It's in the second verse of Bulaspa, and it says that there are 9 Ibijur, right? Now, most of the translations are saying 9 giantesses.
Right.
That's not correct, and it breaks away from the original translation and makes you think of things that aren't what they're talking about, right?
Right.
Because when the word
I love it. I fucking love this.
So the Ibijur is basically, it means like wood woman, woman of the wood, right? And you know, Grimm goes a lot into like wood wives and stuff like that, and we don't know if it's necessarily connected to that because that's like a later folklore character, you know. But it may have been a later evolution. We don't know. But the word means like wood wife or wood woman or something like that, right? And it's like a troll that lives in trees and stuff like that. And when we're talking about 9 Ibijur, you know, we have to remember that in the first verse of Bulas, it kind of invokes Heimdall. It says, "Hear me, all ye holy sons of Heimdall, high and low," and all that, or "Give me a hearing, you know, high and low sons of Heimdall," right? And in the next verse, we're talking about the 9 Ibijur, the 9 wood women, who are probably Heimdall's 9 mothers. All right. Now, the reason why this is important is because we have done a lot of research into Heimdall. His story is very important for what we're doing, and he's very closely connected to Agni. Now, Victor Rydberg, in his second volume of his researches in their Germanic mythology, makes his connection, showing how both Agni and Heimdall are said to have golden teeth, how they're both born of many different mothers, how they're, you know, there's just a lot in their storyline that's very, very similar and identical, to the sense that, like, it tells us that this is the case. Now, because the academics have overlooked this, they mistranslate his name into like "he who shines over the world." But even the name, even like the whole concept, people are always talking about the 9 worlds. That's a mistranslation. There's never any mention of the word 9 worlds, right? There's 9 homes. The word is Hamer, right? Which means home. It doesn't mean world. And the fact that we have an Old Norse word for world, which is Verald.
You broke up just
shows that that's not what 9 homes.
You broke up just a little bit. Start that whole conversation over start that whole sentence over, because it broke up just a little bit. I want to make sure people are clear on this. You said you start with 9 homes.
Right. So there are no 9 homes. There are no 9 worlds.
Right.
Okay? There are 9 homes. And Heimdall, his name means the one shining in the home, because he's the god of the hearth fire.
Right.
He's the god of the sacrificial flame, and he's the god of the need fire. And because of that, we know that the need fire is made from 9 different types of wood. Okay. And there you have the 9 wood women, right?
That makes
sense. Makes sense because, and so then you see that these 9 wood women who turn the world mill, who turn the mill in the underworld, right, become the mothers of Heimdall. And that is another implement that is connected to the underworld that is found on the altar, which is the sacred fire.
And this is a highly animistic perspective when you look at it like that, because you're talking about the spirit entities of 9 different types of wood combined to make the need fire, which is represented by Heimdall. Is my understanding correct?
Right. And the thing is about it is that, you know, when you're looking at it, and I mean, I don't necessarily use the word animist, but I'm saying,
sure, yeah.
You know, the thing is that you are looking at sort of a.
Oh, I lost you. You're back. No,
yeah, I had a call come in.
That's Big Daddy's iPhone.
Right. Yeah, that's my wife did that.
Right.
So the thing is that when you're looking at these 9 woods, you're looking at the 9 wood women and all that, right? There's this notion that you're having the sacred flame that's connected to these 9 women and connected to the underworld, right? So in having that, this is yet another connection to this that builds out this cosmology, and that's really the discovery of the Ibijur term, and looking at it and sort of breaking down the symbolism and showing where it's mentioned elsewhere, and just understanding this is really what helps us to formulate the entire idea that the sacred area is the underworld, right?
Right. Yes.
So that becomes like the whole basis for everything that we're doing. We're building an entirely new ritual structure, which is kind of frustrating for me because I put out the Senda book and it already had a ritual structure.
Right.
But we had to but this was too big, and we're
Well,
probably going to do
these
a
are
second
growing
edition.
pains, man. If we're doing our job right, we should be able to look back at material that we were talking about working with and turning out 2 or 3 years ago, and we should be able to point out that there are things there that are like no longer really correct or no longer really well explored. And if we're not doing that, and if we don't have if our hubris is too big to keep us from being able to do that, then we're not doing ourselves or anybody else a favor. And we're certainly not helping to develop this folk soul that we all care so much about, you know?
Right. And that's it. And the thing is that when we're looking at developing the folk soul, we're looking at developing the traditions and the religion and the spirituality and the philosophy and all the ideas in it, we have to have litmus tests.
We do. Yes.
And I think you wanted to go to commercial before we talked about that fully.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. We'll cut to a commercial now. When we come back, we'll talk about this litmus test, what it is. And for a lot of folks, they don't know what that means. And we'll talk about what the actual words mean. But we'll get into all that when we come back from commercial. We're going to continue talking about this. Now, when we broke, you were talking about the litmus test. Now, a lot of people don't know what that means. So explain what one is, and then explain what you're talking about as it applies to all this. Carry on.
Okay. So the first thing we have to do is we have to understand that there's a difference between method and theory. Okay.
Right.
Now, the method is there's like 5 or 6 different types of methods out there about research, like the overall worldview of what you're looking at, right?
Right.
And then there's the theories. There's like thousands of theories because every single line of material, this is basically literary critique that you're doing.
Sure.
Every single line of material is going to have theories on what that line means and how it's translated and how it works.
Yep.
Okay, so that's how we differentiate things to show people that we don't reject academia completely. We're not just saying they're completely worthless. There's a lot of theories they have out there that are great. There's a lot of stuff out there that we definitely appreciate and want to help promote. And
same is true of the
sometimes
same is true of the medical community, and I deal with that a lot. A lot of that stuff is a lot of the direction that they're going that's influenced by things like pharmaceuticals is totally fucking worthless. But a lot of the stuff, the papers that some of these individuals are turning out are fucking gold. And I'm sure it's the same in the academic communities you're talking about. So carry on, man.
Absolutely. And that's the thing is, so we have like 5 different academic, methods. We call them the schools of thought.
Okay,
right?
cool. Yeah.
The interpretatio method, which is basically the Roman Empire. It's the first method. We put that in there because it's the first time people are really trying to do like comparative mythological research. However, they were doing it in order to assimilate people, right? They were doing it because the Roman Empire was spreading itself around.
Yep.
They actually copied what was called the Interpretatio Graeca, because it was Herodotus who first came up with this when he traveled to Egypt. He's like, "Oh, your gods are like our gods." And
I refer to this. I refer to that subject and that material quite a bit when I'm talking about dogma and indoctrination from a Christian perspective too. So I'm familiar with that work. Yeah, carry on.
So the thing is that when the Romans got a hold of it, they're going around trying to basically just get people to want to be Roman, right? So that they don't feel like they're slaves to Rome.
Right.
And it didn't necessarily work. I mean, that's why Christianity came around later, and it was like more emphatic about just destroying all of it, replacing it completely with Roman culture, Roman religion, Roman everything.
Right.
The interpretation of it was almost like
beer and football only take you so far, and I'm talking about circus and bread. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and so then this later evolves into the Euhemerist movement. The Euhemerist was started by Clement of Alexandria, and then Lactantius. Lactantius was actually the mentor of Constantine, who went around slaughtering people and forcing them to convert to Christianity.
Yeah, real sweet guy.
Yeah, the Euhemerus stuff was basically, that these were just ancient kings and queens, and they weren't real. They weren't real gods. And the Christians got a hold of that and turned it into like, well, this proves that our religion is real because our God is real, and these other gods you guys are worshiping are just kings and queens, right?
Right.
This later develops into the Teutonic Euhemerism, which was started in the Chronicle of Fredegar, went into Paulus Diaconus. A lot of the Frankish chroniclers and writers used it and developed their own method in trying to connect the Teutonic lands to Rome. And so they combined interpretatio method with Euhemerus method and basically said that all of the old gods were Roman heroes instead of like gods. They were Roman heroes. They're still interpretatio. They're still Roman. Right?
Like Thor is Hercules and that kind of shit.
Right. Like, well, actually, no. Thor is Achilles or Ajax. I think Thor is the Ajax. Odin is Priam. And like, so they can't be like divine heroes or anything like that. They have to be human in order for it to be Euhemerist, right? And but they're still Roman, so they're all connected to the
Those of you that don't know, Ajax carried a big fucking hammer, and he was a hero, not part god and part hero like Hercules. So Hercules wouldn't have worked for the Euhemerus thing because he was considered to be half deity, right? Like a demigod. Am I understanding? Okay.
Right. So the thing is that this is what Snorri Sturluson he latched onto, and the prologue of his book is completely a replaying of that Euhemerus method. Then the second part, the Gylfaginning, right, is still using Christian apologetics because he's the word Gylfaginning means the tricking of guilty, right? And the whole basis of Christian apologetics and Euhemerism is that these people, these human beings, were going around tricking people and believe that they were gods. The entire message of Gylfaginning is that these human beings are putting these illusions up in front of guilty's face and making him think that they're divine. And then at the end of it, he's standing in an empty field. He realizes he got tricked. And then these human beings went around spreading these stories about, stating that they were divine, right? And then, the Skald Skaparmál is just, it has some of those stories as well. And, so it's still like a Christian apologetic work.
Right.
But the thing is that we do know the one source that we have, and this is our litmus test. This is the Nordic Society litmus test, the Epic litmus test, is that the Poetic Edda is our heathen source, right? And it was Snorri Sturluson's source. That's why we consider him to be a secondary source, because throughout the Prose Edda, he's quoting the Poetic Edda. Right?
I talk about this a lot when we're talking. Yep. Yeah, I'm talking the same language you are to people most of the time. Yep. Right.
So it's the Poetic Edda is the heathen source, and it's like if this guy who was a Christian who was Christianizing, obviously, is using that, he obviously recognized that as the source material.
Right.
And and this is what's so amazing is how this has been so elusive to people. It's like, dude, if you're citing a source, you're the secondary source. I don't care how old your book is.
No, you're right. Yeah. Yep.
And they're like, and some people are like, well, we dated the pages here, and this dating method shows that the Poetic Edda is like discovered, like these pages are younger than the Prose Edda. But it's like, dude, the Prose Edda is quoting those pages, so obviously the Prose Edda is the younger source, right?
Any investigator would understand.
Right. And so the thing is that these documents, though, they go missing for a long time. They get discovered in the 1670s, and they eventually, by this time, Christianity has indoctrinated all of Europe, and it's Christian culture, Roman culture. The Roman Euhemerus method is like the belief of the people. Everybody believes it. Like it's actual historic fact.
Fundamental. They're fundamentalist. Yes.
Right. And so, like, they believed literally that Odin was Priam, that that Thor was Ajax. They believed that there was like some Arch Edda, some text that these Aesir people that they called the Asia people because they came from Troy, that they had like some major source they were looking for.
Yeah, I've heard
that
about
was
that
told
too.
them
Yeah.
everything. Yeah, and so it's like so they're basically throwing these interpretations into these documents when they discover them, and they develop what's called the biblical school, which
Yeah.
is basically the Poetic Edda is right on par with all the rest of it, that it's all influenced by Christianity. The Bible is everything. Every word is everything that looks and sounds like the Bible is the Bible. And this became like the basis for modern academia, even to today. Some people are still using these theories, and they're spurious and they're ridiculous, and they don't. Some people think that the whole thing of Ragnarok is just the apocalypse, and it's like
it's the end of a cycle,
man. One thing, right? And
nothing.
here's the one thing that I try to tell people, okay, about these sources, all right? Yeah. Every single document that we have on the ancient Teutonic belief system that is written by a Christian, that is written as a Christian document, right, is done so blatantly. They never hide anything. They never try to pretend like it's heathenry. They never try to do anything like that. They're always
I've noticed that.
people.
I've seen the same thing. Yes.
So they're telling people, I am a Christian, right?
Yes.
This is Christianity, and especially in these older texts, And so they're saying like this is Christian. Story Sturluson says it blatantly. Saxo Grammaticus says it's blatant. Paulus Diaconus, all these guys, they'll lay out and tell you their Christian theories and ideas, and then they present like these stories from their Christian euhemerized message. The Poetic Edda does not do this. The Poetic Edda is not blatant. There's no hidden codes in it. So you look at a poem like the Solar Diode, right? I had a guy come to me one time and he was like, "Oh, the Solar Diode proves that there's Christianity in it." I said, "No, the Solar Diode proves that it's not, because the Solar Diode is blatant. It tells you that there's Christianity in it. When they're talking about God and Jesus, they say it straight up. This is God, this is Jesus. It's right here,
Right.
And so it's not hidden in the Voluspa. It's not hidden in Havamal, Grimnismal, all these great poems. And that's what I tell people. So what happens is, because of this, these secular movements start to develop, and the later schools that arise out of it, after they pretty much convinced all of Europe that that our ancestors had no indigenous religion, they were all savage barbarians. They didn't, they may have had these names or words, but they didn't have any codified philosophical beliefs. They were just savages, and they believed that. And so they said, "There's no way they could have had this," right? And so what they developed later was what we call the nature school and the archetypal school. Now we've gone from the realm of it not only being not the religion of our ancestors, now it's not a religion at all. It's just figments of your imagination.
Yes.
It's just people who like hear the thunder and they get scared and they go pray to it, or they figments of your imagination.
Let me point something out to everybody too, from a biological standpoint, okay? And that's kind of more my background. Biologically speaking, there is no significant difference between the human brain right now and say 5,000 years ago. Okay.
Right.
Now it's a lot longer than that. 5,000 years ago is a relatively, I don't know, that's forgiving for the purposes of what I'm about to say. But we were not fucking idiots. We have never been idiots. We have always had a hell of a lot of brain power, and we just have applied it to what's available to us. And the idea that our ancestors were ignorant fucking barbarians is so full of hubris that it's hard to swallow at all,
Right. And you can see their biases. Their biases play through their translations, through their viewpoints, through their worldview. Like, look at the poem Harbertsjod, right? The poem Harbertsjod, we've made a very serious case, and this actually used to be debated, right? We've made a very serious case that Harbard in that poem is Loki. And we can show the comparisons to Loki's stories, to his attitude, to the things he says specifically in other poems.
The way things are worded.
Right. But the academics will say, no, Harbard is Odin, and we have to be like imperialist in this, empirical. I'm sorry, not imperialist, empirical in this, and use the fact that Odin's name Harbard is mentioned in another source, and we have to say that it is because of that. Okay.
I think that
you want to be in.
Listen, I think that says something completely different than Harbard is Odin. I think that speaks to the possibility that there are huge parts of Odin within Loki. But that's my personal view of it, and I've not explored it very well. So I don't expound on it. But it's there's parts in the
well, the thing is about it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No,
the problem with it is that in the poem, right, you have two characters. Just take the names out of it for a second. You have two characters who are continuously throughout the entire poem spewing venom at each other, this
Right.
anger and hatred, right?
Yeah.
Well, to an academic who's an atheist or a Christian, that's perfectly fine because that's what savage heathen gods do.
Exactly.
Right? They're
Yes.
just jerks to each other. Like, this is Odin and his son just sitting there talking about how awful each other are, right? And then, like, at the end, Harvard's like, I'm not going to help you and whatever, right? And
Right.
it's like, that's perfectly logical to them. The same
Right.
thing like with Goldberg, and a lot of them say Goldberg is Freya. Well,
No
how
way.
is that? So,
Yeah.
so that basically you're saying that it's okay that the gods, stabbed Freya, the goddess of love, with spears and then set her on fire 3 times because
Right.
that's okay in your mind.
Right.
And like, that's the problem because we're looking at this from a religious perspective, we try to figure it out rather than just pass it off and say, well, it's represented here. Now,
Right.
looking at their empirical statements, okay, let's
Yeah.
move over to another poem, Skjoldsbensmal, right?
Right.
Now, in
Yes.
Skjoldsbensmal, Svipdag comes in and he meets this character, Skjoldsbid, right? And here it is. You can actually use empirical evidence because Skjoldsbid is mentioned as a name of Odin in
Right.
another source specifically. And in this poem, his characteristics actually line up with Odin, but the academics say, no, it's not Odin, it's a giant. Well, what happened to your empirical evidence? The whole empirical thing, mentioned in with Harvard John. Oh, we're just going to ignore that this time.
Yeah.
So there's no consistency. There's no litmus test. These people
Right.
are all over the place.
Right.
And what we do is we have a litmus test that's basically built on the idea that the Poetic Edda is a sacred source. It's
Yep.
ancient, it's heathen, it's ancestral. It is our source, right?
Yep.
And the idea of building an epic is built upon Völuspá, because Völuspá lays out a chronology, right?
Right.
And shows us how that chronology plays out from Ginnungagap to Ragnarok. And then what we do is we create what we call lines of convergence. And the lines of convergence are, you find what's said in the Poetic Edda, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you find where it's mentioned in other sources, and never let those sources contradict the Poetic Edda.
Right.
And what happens when you do that is your theories start to become wildly different from the academics, right? And that's why people are always wondering, like, why are these guys writing such weird stuff? Why is it so different from everything I've ever learned? And
Right.
it's because our litmus test is completely different from theirs.
Uh-huh.
And their litmus test is basically that these people were savages. They were barbarians. They couldn't have had a higher belief system or a higher religion. Whenever you're seeing anything philosophical or having any kind of higher thought, it had to have been borrowed from Christianity or from the Greeks. Right?
And obviously incapable of understanding and using things like logic, even though obviously the poems are set up in a mathematical order that requires a really great understanding of mathematics. I mean, there's all kinds of shit that's like, you guys don't even make any sense with what you're coming up with as far as your perspective of our ancient people.
Right. And one of the worst ones out there is the nature school. Like, to me, that's the most insidious school, because it's literally, because the nature school is basically a cult of personality. It's
Right.
built upon the idea of whoever is the top dog at the time, and whatever theories they come up with, is like, because I'm me, that's what it is. It's totally a cult of personality. It always has been since when Max Mueller first came up with it. He's like, oh, I'm a big high up academic and I can just invent whatever I want to, and therefore it is, right?
It's the hubris of the PhD, and that's a big problem with an academia, no matter where you look.
Right. And so they've come up with the most ridiculous theories you could possibly imagine. Like Gambutas, who tried to say that, whenever Odin drinks from a drinking horn, because the drinking horn looks kind of like a penis, Odin's actually drinking semen, and the drinking horn is a big penis. And the same thing with like the maypoles, and everything's a sexual symbol. And it's like, rather than trying to connect things to like what we know about our ancestors, it's like, I'm just going to look at it. I'm going to see a pattern in it. I'm going to recognize that pattern as something that I want to believe it is. And then I'm going to say that's what it is. And I'm going to use that as evidence for research. And that is like completely ridiculous. That is like, if you were doing that as a physicist, you would get laughed out of academia, They'd be like, what the hell are you talking about,
Right.
Because the letter, because you think the letter, B looks like some boobs or something, that like, that's the theory.
Oh, yeah, I hear that about Berkano, the rune Berkano sometimes. Oh, it's a feminine rune because, and I'm like,
right.
No, dude, no.
It's like the whole thing is like, rather than trying to follow a basis, a foundation, and this is a lot of the reason why the Hindus have told academics, look, stay away from our stuff. don't look at it. Don't
Right.
translate. That's why
They
you only
have.
see like a few translations of the Vedas,
Yeah.
because they're like, dude, don't mess with it, because
Oh,
you're
and they're
not going to get it.
particularly
You're not going to understand it.
right, and they're particularly adamant about, you know, people who are under the influence of the church, you know, the British, you know, when they were first coming in and trying to translate that stuff. There's a lot of information about how they felt about that shit.
Right. That's exactly right, you know. And so there's like this whole mentality that these guys have towards these things, and they're always trying to push their worldview onto it, you know. And so it becomes deconstructionist. It becomes,
Right.
you know, when it's deconstructing, oh, that doesn't matter. That doesn't mean this. That's not native. That's not this. Not that. It's all this deconstructionist, and they sort of feed off each other for this, you know, deconstructing these stories and the traditions, because, you know, fitting them all together and working things out and understanding it takes too much time and doesn't sell books. So, what we're doing, you know,
it flies in the face of that immediate material gratification that everybody's so fucking addicted to. And nobody's paying any attention to things like breaking the inertia so that we can continue to offer something to the future generations, something that's worth a shit instead of the same old fucking drivel. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And that's the thing about it is, you know, in using the epic method, right? We realized that, you know, it takes a long time to do this. I mean, the True Edit took me 11 years to put together, you know. I mean,
I want to talk about the sort of the guts of the epic method and explain that. We're going to go to a commercial break, and when we come back, I want to talk about what is the epic school of thought. What are the parts of it that make it what it is, and why you chose to go that direction. So we're going to go on a commercial break real quick, and then we're going to get right back into that. So, all right, we're back.
Let's do it.
All right, so welcome back, and now we're going to talk about the epic school, what it is, and what are the parts of it, just in maybe briefly, so that you can help people understand what that means, so they understand where you're coming from on it. So go ahead.
Right. So the first thing that we have to, you know, I want everybody to understand is the epic method is not about a singular person. You know, a lot of people try to think that like we're all up here like worshiping Victor Rydberg or something like that, or William Reeves or B or whatever, you know. And and some people try to denigrate us by like attacking Rydberg and making up things about him, but it's like, dude, Rydberg invented a tool. It's like if you were like, you know, using a hammer and you're like, oh, well, something about the hammer, about the guy who invented it, he was like a horrible person, so I'm not going to use it, you know. And it was like, and, you know, and all the
throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
Right. And so all the things that they were saying about Rydberg wasn't true, but it was like, but it, you know, it didn't even matter. It was like, dude, like it's a tool. It's a tool that we're using that we know is working. Right. And so Victor Rydberg started his career by basically destroying the Euhemerus school and the interpretational school and the biblical school and then the meteorological school. The archetypal school hadn't really come around yet, so he didn't really go after that. But he so soundly defeated a lot of these schools, like the biblical school. I mean, Sophus Bugge wrote him a letter, because Bugge was the one who invented the biblical school, and he wrote Rydberg and basically admitted defeat. You know, he said, like, he's like, dude, I realize that I'm just a philologist. I don't really know what I'm talking about. Thank you so much for this. I wish I had your information sooner, you know. And so, like, and that's what Rydberg did. He started out, like, just showing everybody how ridiculous these schools are and how they're not using a litmus test and how they're not developing methods. They're just creating like connections and spurious, you know, relationships to things and saying that correlation equals causation, which is a logical fallacy. And like, I mean, and so he was like trying to present this scientifically using a method that would allow it to unfold and show the way that are, you know, that they had like this epic chain of events, and you can see it. Like once you start investigating it, you can see that there are things like when, you know, one character's dead here, he's obviously not going to be over here. You know, there's going to be connections to one thing here and not to another. And you see that epic played out in Bullspa in a very condensed and abbreviated form. But we know it's there. And the fact that the Bullspa is the first poem of the collection, and it's sort of prominent and it's so important. You know, and it shows us like all of these different things about how our ancestors viewed the world. And so, you know, the first thing you have to do is get past the idea that Bullspa may be a Christian text or whatever, because we can connect it to this biblical thing or that biblical thing. I mean, I'll give you a great example. Like one of the things that like you can really help you to start questioning stuff like that is when you're looking at like the word Easter, right?
Right.
So
the star
for the longest time, if you're looking looking at Easter or Ostra or any of those words, right? Then you look at some of the older dictionaries. For the longest time, these guys were translating Easter as Esther from the Bible, right? And Astarte, who was an old Babylonian goddess,
Yeah,
right?
Sumerian goddess,
And the reason why they did that is because that is, their world. They don't see anything outside of the Middle East. They don't see anything outside of the Bible. So to them, it's just like our culture is insignificant. It's not part of their biblical structure. So they had to
eradicate it anyway. They're trying to eradicate it anyway, dude. So why would it play any prominence, and what would be the goal of doing that?
Right. And so they have like this whole thing, this whole idea, that their worldview gets played into this over and over and over again. And so when we're coming to it as religious people, and that's what Rydberg was basically breaking down when he was showing, like, this is not, ancient savages sitting around worshiping. This is not, the euhemerus method. This is not people worshiping king and queen. This is a religion,
It's a
and
religion.
you have to look at theology, and none of the others will do that. They look at it as like these mythic symbols, and they're just seeing symbols. They're not trying to understand it as a religious structure and a religious belief.
Right.
They would never do the same thing with like Hinduism or Shinto or Christianity or any of these things. They would never do that. But with us, with this, they're like, oh no, it's just a bunch of symbols. It's just stuff that we can make whatever we want to. And so the epic method is built upon the idea that this was a religion and that these tribes shared a common culture. Now they manifested it differently. You can definitely tell the difference between like, some of the Saxon stuff and some of the German stuff and some of the Scandinavian stuff.
Definitely.
But the overall foundation of it is the same, right? And it's the same. I mean, Wotan is Odin and Bodin, and and Thunor is Thor, and we know this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And like when you're looking at the interrelationship between the tribes. I mean, these guys, a lot of them were related to one another. They were like cousins and stuff. This guy would find a tribe over here and the clan over here. Like you can look at the story of Widukind, who was this great great Saxon rebel against Charlemagne, right?
Yes.
Well, I mean, his cousin was like the king of Denmark.
Right.
And we actually believe that that's why Lindisfarne happened, because his cousin was like, well, you guys just slaughtered all these Saxons who are our friends and family, and so we're going to start coming after you,
Right.
Exactly. But you see this relationship, like they were intertwined and they shared a common culture.
Yeah.
So they knew each other. The whole idea that they're all isolated and they're savage and all this stuff, that just leads you in all kinds of weird directions.
Right.
When you see a common culture and you saw that they were related and they could tell stories, and one story would spread to another tribe, and then those stories would either, if they got popular or became part of the folk consciousness, they would become part of this religious epic, and it would become part of this religious chain of stories that were, inspired by the gods and presented to people. And we can actually see some of them that remained localized, some of them that were just local legends that just stayed that way. A lot of your folklore, it's that, like Iron John and stuff. I mean, they believe that some of these folklore, folk tales and stuff like that are really, really ancient, but they never got introduced into the greater mythic epic.
Right.
And so that's our litmus test. And that's what we do, is we start with the Poetic Edda, and the Poetic Edda is the formation of everything that we do. And we figure out the translations of the Poetic Edda. We look at like the topography, not what translators are writing, not even what transcribers are writing, because we see that they've taken us in all kinds of wrong directions.
Right.
And they've made things that don't fit. And anytime that they don't, now look, anybody out there who's interested in this stuff, I want to ask you to do an exercise for me. Okay. I want you to go, if anybody out there has Hollander's translation, I want to use his because I know I've done it myself, and that was the book that I used. If you look at Hollander's translation, go through the notes, the footnotes, right? And look for the words emendations and interpolations.
Right.
Okay? And then go through that text and count how many times they do it. Okay. Yep. And in Hollander's thing, I think I came up with like over 300 of them.
Holy shit.
Okay. And
wow.
Emendation means that they changed the text because they didn't understand the poem. An interpolation means they added to the text because they didn't understand the poem.
Oh my God, dude.
Rydberg said, with this method, said, you don't have to do that. And he demanded that people stop doing it.
Right.
You cannot translate these sources with emendations and interpolations. You can't do that. That's changing the game. It's making something that it's not.
Right.
You know?
Especially so, like, 300 of them. I mean, holy shit, dude.
Right. And so it's like you're looking at them doing that. You know, you have to start to question, like, what is happening here? You know.
Right.
And then you have to kind of rethink the whole thing, because the source material is all we've got. It's all we have. You know, all we have is what the sources say.
Right.
And if they're translating the sources in a way that just presents their own worldview on it because they don't understand it, then that's a serious, serious problem, right?
They're not doing their fucking job, really, is what it boils down to, you know?
Right. And one of the things that I would give you an example of how that is one of the most egregious, right, is there's a word, Luther, L-U-T-H-R, right? Yeah. And so the Luther, in the original, and if you look up the old dictionaries, like the Bigbeson and some of the old, like 1800 dictionaries and stuff like that, then you can see that they originally translated, the word means a mill box, okay? It means a mill box, and that you would translate it as a mill box, and it connects to the world mill, right?
Right.
And what the academics did is, because the word Luther is mentioned in the Prose Edda under the story of Bergelmer, right? They didn't really understand how to translate it, because they're seeing it as the connection to Noah's Ark. And they eventually changed the definition of the word. They changed the definition of the word to mean a boat, right?
Oh my God.
But that's not what the word means. It doesn't mean a boat. It's not a boat. It's a mill box. And so they were like, well, maybe it's a container because it's a box. And then some of them translated it as a coffin. Maybe it's a coffin. And then they were like, well, no, it's a vessel, so it's a boat. And we'll just say it's a boat. And then in later dictionaries, they actually changed it to boat in order to make it fit. Because they're talking about, like, the Bergelmer, you know, Ymir's blood flows and it becomes the flood.
Yes.
They say, like, it's Noah's blood and all that
that's
stuff.
Noah's. And so this box must be the ark. Yeah, way to go, guys. Nice work.
Right. And that's continuous throughout all of it. Like, I mean, you know, we're translating the Bullaspin, and we're seeing this stuff over and over and over and over again. So it's like, dude, if you can't trust the source material and what's translated and what's been handed to us, then we have a very serious problem. We have to go back to the drawing board, and we have to start figuring it out. And that's what we did. And that's why we created the Austro Edda and the Odinist Edda. And that's why we called it Sacred Lore of the North. Because for us, the Poetic Edda is sacred. And all we're doing is we're building a storyline on it by piecing those sources together, using the original source material. You know, we have to fill in gaps when we have to, but we do so logically and reasonably, and saying, you know, 2 + 2 probably equals 4, you know?
Yeah,
we're not making stuff up. We're not inventing things. This is what the source material says. And so people come to us, they're like, oh man, I've never read this before. Well, you need to pick up a book and read it.
I got to tell you, most of the people watching this right now have no idea that was the case. They just don't fucking know. And I have got to tell you how much I appreciate you coming on and pointing some of this shit out, letting us know what you're doing and what your work is. And I'm after I know you got to go, so I'm going to continue on with the interview a couple of minutes and reiterate some things like where they can find you and your work and how they can go take a look at all this. This is really new stuff to most people, man.
Right. Yeah. Come look at our website, man. We're on Telegram now. We have like all these different projects going on. There's just so much exciting stuff happening because we have a team of people. We have like 40 members now. All of them very talented, very, very smart people who've been doing this research their entire lives, who decided to put aside vanity projects and all the stuff that people like to do. They came together as a team, and we're coming up with ideas that we never even thought possible. I mean, we're talking about theology that's like on par with Hinduism. And that's why a lot of Hindus, you're starting to see those guys coming around and talking about this stuff and seeing these connections to what we're doing. And we're not
they got to be excited. They got to be excited about what we're doing here. I mean, because they've been through some of this process before. This has got to make them feel like Big Brother helping out the little brother a little bit, you know?
Right. And we don't practice syncretism. You know, they don't want syncretism. We don't want syncretism. We're just looking at like the philosophical similarities so that we can start to flesh things out using our own sources.
That'll give you directions on things to look for. I mean, how can you find stuff if you don't even know what you're looking for? Once you know, then you got something to go on, and that makes it a lot easier. This is really, really amazing stuff you guys are working on, man.
Thanks.
Awesome think tank. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'll continue on for a couple of minutes and tell everybody how to reach you and all that kind of stuff. And we'll have some of those little dialogue boxes so folks can click on it and find your material. I'll need to get some of that material from you before the end of the day, but we can do that whenever you have time. Thank you so much, man. It's been great having you on. This has been a hell of a dump of information and material, ideas, philosophies, and everything else. And this is what folks like to hear, man. So thank you so much.
Thank you, man. Thanks for having me on.
You have a great day, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Absolutely, buddy. You take care.
All right, thanks. All right, so that was Mark Puryear from the Nordic Society. We're going to give you links and ways to reach out to him with his material and stuff. Also, there's been some, I wanted to mention the Arvidsson project. I wanted to get on board with that. I just don't have the Swedish skill, the Swedish language skill to be able to participate in it at this point. But it's my hope that as a musician, I might be able to contribute a little bit some point in the future. And I'm really looking forward to that. And that's an exciting project for me because we have to develop we have to continue to develop our heathen culture. We're going to make a lot of mistakes. We're going to figure them out. We're going to correct them along the way. This is not a complete cultural, we're not coming into something where we've got just everything's handed to us. You know what I'm saying? So we're having to go through and look at our lore and try to understand it better from a fresh perspective, question the sources that we have, question the translations that we've had. All these things are critically important. And that stuff's actually going on right now. And there are a variety of people that I'm going to have on this show that are approaching this from different angles, and not all of them agree. Most of them disagree on a wide variety of parts. But one thing that we all agree on is that this culture is worth developing, reviving, and rediscovering. And it's empowering us in the process. So thank you for joining me on this road. This is going to get really, really cool. And I appreciate y'all being here. As always, walk with the ancestors.